The silence before everything changed. The world knew them as two of Hollywood's most beloved stars. But what people didn't see was the quiet bond that grew behind the cameras. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed, and it didn't need to be explained. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had met years ago, long before fame began to feel heavy on their shoulders. Yet, every time they crossed paths, something gentle and unspoken seemed to pull them closer. It started during a late afternoon rehearsal on a movie set. The lights were dim, the crew tired, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Sandra had just finished a difficult scene that didn't go well, her director's voice still echoing in her mind. She felt small, almost invisible, and then she felt a quiet presence beside her. Keanu didn't say much at first. He simply stood there holding 2 cups of tea, one for her, one for himself. He handed her a cup without looking directly, as if words weren't needed. That simple gesture was the start of something she couldn't name yet. Something built not on romance or publicity, but on deep understanding. From that day, a rhythm formed between them. They talked in fragments between takes, shared small laughs during night shoots, and learned to read each other's silences. Sandra once said that he was the only person in the room who never made her feel like she had to prove herself. He just saw her. Not the actress, not the celebrity, just her. Years passed, and fame became a strange companion for both of them. It brought light, but it also brought shadows. There were stories written, rumors whispered, and questions that neither of them answered. But in quiet corners of award shows or during accidental run-ins on set lots, their eyes met with the same calm recognition, the kind that said, "You're not alone." One evening, after a long charity event, Sandra found herself sitting alone on the balcony of her hotel room. The city below buzzed with celebration, but she felt detached, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. The laughter and flashes from downstairs blurred into a dull hum. Her thoughts drifted to the people she had lost, the parts of herself she had hidden to survive in this industry. She didn't hear the door open until a soft knock broke the silence. Keanu stepped in, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. He said he had noticed her leave early, and he thought she might need some company. She smiled weakly, hiding the tears that threatened to escape. He didn't press her to talk, didn't ask why. He just sat next to her, staring at the lights below. After a few minutes, he said, "You know, sometimes the quiet people carry the loudest stories." That night changed something in Sandra. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to speak honestly. She told him about the loneliness that followed her even in crowded rooms, the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine, the weight of being everyone's strength but her own. Keanu listened without interrupting, his gaze steady and full of kindness. When she finished, he said softly, "You don't have to be strong all the time. Being real is stronger." She didn't realize she was crying until he handed her a napkin. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no music, no grand confession, just 2 people quietly healing in each other's company. And for the first time in years, she felt lighter. What she didn't know was that Keanu understood that pain far too well. Behind his calm eyes, he carried his own storms, loss, heartbreak, and the constant ache of having lived through too many goodbyes. He never shared much about it, but that night, as he walked back to his room, he knew that Sandra's honesty had awakened something inside him he had long buried, the need to connect again, to care without fear. In the following months, they began spending more time together off-set. Dinners that started as friendly turned into hours of quiet conversation. They didn't talk about the industry or their fame, but about simple things, childhood memories, favorite books, the meaning of home. Sandra once laughed and said, "We sound like 2 people who ran away from noise." Keanu smiled, replying, "Maybe we just found the same peace." Their connection became something rare, not defined by romance or headlines, but by loyalty. When Sandra's mother passed away, Keanu was there. He didn't speak much during the funeral, but he stood beside her the whole time like an anchor in the storm. And when Keanu faced one of the hardest losses of his own, the kind of grief that shakes the ground beneath your feet, Sandra was the first person who showed up at his door. Their friendship grew in ways that words could never capture. People often asked them if they were more than friends, but both would smile and avoid the question. They didn't need to explain it to anyone. It was something only they understood. But the world never stops moving, and with fame came distance. Projects pulled them to opposite sides of the world. Time zones, schedules, and the chaos of success made it harder to stay in touch. Months would pass without a message. But when they finally spoke again, it felt as if not a single day had gone by. One evening, years later, Sandra received a letter. It was handwritten, neat, and signed with familiar initials. KR, it wasn't dramatic, but it carried a quiet sadness. Keanu had written that he was taking time away from the spotlight, that he needed space to rebuild himself, to find meaning again. He didn't say when he'd return or if he would. Sandra read the letter twice, her hands trembling. She felt an ache she couldn't name. Not loss exactly, but the fear of losing something pure in a world that rarely allowed purity to survive. She tried to write back, but every word felt heavy. She didn't want to sound like she was begging him to stay, yet she couldn't bear the thought of him disappearing completely. After several drafts, she finally wrote one line that felt right. "No matter where you go, I'll always understand." She sent it without expecting a reply. But what came next, a few weeks later, changed everything. The envelope that arrived wasn't from Keanu. It was from someone else. And what was written inside would make her question everything she thought she knew about him. The letter's secret. The morning light filtered through the soft curtains of Sandra's home, touching the quiet edges of her room. She sat still at the table, staring at the new envelope that lay before her. It had no return address, only her name written in neat handwriting. She recognized the way the letters curved, but it wasn't Keanu's. Her chest tightened. Something about it felt off, like a shadow falling across a familiar path. She hesitated before opening it. Her mind ran through possibilities. Maybe it was from someone who knew him, maybe a fan, maybe nothing important. But her heart, that quiet part that always felt him from afar, whispered that this letter was going to change something. She finally tore it open. Inside was a single folded page, the paper slightly crumpled as if it had traveled too far to get there. She unfolded it slowly. The first line made her pulse quicken. "Dear Sandra, you don't know me, but I was close to Keanu. He asked me to deliver this if something ever happened to him." Her breath caught. She read the line again, hoping she had misunderstood. If something ever happened to him. The words rang like a bell inside her chest, echoing with fear. Her hands shook as she kept reading. "Keanu has gone somewhere far from the city. He wanted peace, and he said he might not come back soon. He asked that you don't worry and that you keep believing in kindness, no matter what the world becomes. He said you once told him that every good thing starts with a small act. He wanted you to remember that." There was no signature, no clue who wrote it. Only a faint smudge at the bottom of the page, as if someone's hand had trembled while folding it. Sandra sat frozen. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. She read the letter again and again, but it only deepened her confusion. What had happened? Where had he gone? And why would he ask someone else to send this? The next few days became a blur. She tried calling his number, but it went straight to voicemail. She emailed his assistant, his manager, even an old friend they had both known from a charity event. No one seemed to know where he was. Everyone gave polite, distant answers. "He's taking time off," they said. "He'll be fine." But their voices carried uncertainty, and she felt it. For the first time, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt since her early years in Hollywood. Helplessness. She was used to control, to being strong, to managing chaos with grace. But this was different. This wasn't about career or fame. This was about someone she truly cared about. Vanishing into silence, one evening she drove to the last place they had spoken, a small cafe tucked behind a row of bookstores on Sunset Boulevard. It was where they had once spent hours talking about life, dreams, and how fragile people can be when they hide behind smiles. She sat at their usual table, ordering tea for two out of habit. The chair opposite her remained empty, yet she could almost feel his presence. The waiter placed the cups down gently. "Waiting for someone?" he asked kindly. She smiled faintly. "Maybe." He nodded, not pushing the question further. The warmth of the tea rose in tiny clouds, and she stared into it as if it might give her answers. That night, as she drove home, the radio played a quiet song, one that Keanu had once said reminded him of peace. It was strange how music could carry memories like invisible threads. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, one by one, until the city lights blurred into streaks of color. Weeks turned into months. She tried to move on, diving into new projects, interviews, public events, all the noise that usually kept her from feeling too much. But every night, when the lights went out and the silence returned, she found herself rereading that letter. She memorized every word, every smudge, every uneven space between lines. It became both a comfort and a wound. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. She was in Vancouver for a film shoot, walking through a narrow street lined with small antique shops. Something about the quiet reminded her of Keanu. She stopped at one store that displayed old typewriters and photographs. Inside, an elderly man sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. She wandered around, touching the worn edges of forgotten things. In a small wooden box near the window, she found a stack of vintage postcards. Most were blank, but one caught her attention. It was faded, but on the back there was a familiar handwriting, the same curved letters, calm and careful. Her heart skipped. She turned it over, and her hands began to tremble. It was a picture of a lake surrounded by pine trees, and on the back, written faintly in pencil, were 4 words, "Find the lake, Sandra." She stared at it, her pulse racing. It couldn't be a coincidence. She flipped the card again, looking for clues. There was a small ink stamp on the corner, a date and a location. Kamloops, British Columbia. She whispered to herself, "Keanu, what are you trying to tell me?" Without thinking further, she bought the postcard, left the store, and sat in her car, gripping the wheel tightly. Something deep inside her told her that this wasn't just a memory. It was a message, a trail he had left behind. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every scene she filmed felt distant, like she was there but not really there. She researched lakes near Kamloops. There were many, but one stood out, Paul Lake. Years ago, Keanu had mentioned visiting it during a motorcycle trip. He had called it the place where silence feels alive. That night, she made a decision. No manager, no cameras, no assistants. Just her and a rented car. She left at dawn, the sky painted with the first light of morning. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the air crisp and quiet. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that her heart refused to let go. As she drove through the forest roads, her thoughts returned to their last conversation. He had said, "Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to disappear from everyone who remembers who you were." She had laughed at the time, thinking it was just another of his poetic thoughts, but now those words felt heavy, almost prophetic. After hours of driving, she finally reached the lake. The water shimmered like glass under the sun, surrounded by whispering trees. There was no one around, just the sound of wind and distant birds. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the shore. Something in the sand caught her eye. A small folded note weighed down by a smooth stone. Her heart pounded as she picked it up. It was old, the edges soft and faded. She unfolded it. Slowly, and when she saw the handwriting, her breath hitched. It was Keanu's. The note read, "If you found this, it means you didn't give up. I knew you wouldn't. I'm not lost, Sandra, just trying to live without the noise. I needed to see the world again, not as a name, but as a person. When I come back, I hope we still understand each other." Her tears fell freely now. She pressed the paper to her chest, closing her eyes. Part of her felt peace, knowing he was alive. Part of her ached at the distance he had chosen. But deeper than all of that was pride. Pride that he was still the same man who believed in quiet truth. As she stood there, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and rain. She whispered, "You don't have to come back to be understood." But what she didn't know was that, far from that lake, someone else had been watching her journey. Closely. Someone who knew Keanu's past far too well and who wasn't ready to let his peace remain untouched. The man in the shadows. The days that followed her visit to the lake felt heavier than Sandra expected. Even though she had found the note, even though she knew Keanu was alive somewhere, a strange restlessness kept echoing in her chest. It was not sadness exactly, but something deeper, like standing between peace and longing. She had returned to Los Angeles quietly, telling no one about her trip. She hid the postcard and Keanu's note inside a small wooden box on her bedside table. Every night she would take them out, read them, and whisper small prayers that he was safe. The world around her moved fast again, red carpets, interviews, rehearsals, and flashing lights. Everyone asked about her new film, her charity projects, her smile. No one asked about her silence. She had learned how to hide it too well. But one evening, while leaving a studio in downtown Los Angeles, something happened that broke the rhythm. As she walked to her car, she noticed a man standing across the street. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just leaning against a lamppost, wearing a black coat and dark glasses. But when their eyes met for a brief moment, a cold shiver ran through her. It wasn't fear at first, just a feeling that he knew her name without ever saying it. She unlocked her car quickly and got inside. Before she started the engine, she looked up again. The man was gone. That night, she couldn't sleep. She told herself it was just coincidence, maybe a fan, maybe nothing. But something in her gut whispered otherwise. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived at her house. It wasn't from anyone she knew, and it had no return address. Again, her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with one short line. "You shouldn't have gone to the lake." Her stomach tightened. She read the sentence over and over, trying to make sense of it. There was no signature, no explanation, only those words written in ink that had slightly bled into the paper as if written in haste. For the first time in years, Sandra felt real fear. Not the kind that comes from movies or stage lights, the quiet, real kind that creeps into your breath and refuses to leave. She decided not to tell anyone. Fame had taught her one thing. Once a story leaves your lips, it no longer belongs to you. She kept the letter in her jacket and tried to focus on work, but the world around her started to feel heavier, sharper. Every face in a crowd seemed to watch her a little too long. Every sound behind her felt just a little too close. A week later, she received an unexpected call from a mutual friend, an old cinematographer who had once worked with both her and Keanu. His voice was low, hesitant. "Sandra, I don't know if I should tell you this," he said, "but someone's been asking around about you and Keanu, not reporters, someone different." Her heart sank. "What do you mean, different?" she asked softly. "Quiet type," he replied. "Doesn't say much, but he shows pictures. Yours, Keanu's, and the lake." The phone felt heavy in her hand. She thanked him, hung up, and sat still for a long moment. The puzzle pieces that had been scattered for months were beginning to take shape, and what they formed scared her. She decided to return to the cafe where she and Keanu used to meet. It was her only place of clarity, a spot where time seemed to slow down. As she sat at their old table, the waiter, the same one from years ago, approached with a small smile. "Been a while since you came here," he said. She nodded. "Yeah, I just needed quiet." He placed a cup of tea in front of her, and she noticed a folded napkin beneath it. When she lifted it, a small piece of paper fell out. Her pulse raced as she opened it. It read, "You're not alone in this. He trusted the wrong person." Her hands shook violently. She looked around the cafe, but no one seemed out of place. Just regular people, a couple reading, a man typing on a laptop, two teenagers laughing over dessert. Yet she could feel it again, the weight of unseen eyes. That night, back home, she locked every door and sat on her couch in silence. Her thoughts swirled like smoke. He trusted the wrong person. What did it mean? Was Keanu in danger? Was she? Then, in a quiet moment between fear and exhaustion, she noticed something she hadn't before. On the back of Keanu's note, the one she found by the lake, there was a faint symbol, almost invisible under the fold. She held it under the lamp and saw it clearly now. It looked like an old crest. Two interlocked circles, one light, one dark. She searched for it online, tracing it through images and forgotten references. After hours of searching, she found a small article about a humanitarian foundation that Keanu had secretly supported years ago. It helped orphans, veterans, and struggling artists, but it had quietly shut down after a financial scandal. And there, at the bottom of one of the photos, was the same symbol. She leaned back, her mind racing. Keanu had once told her, "The world always tries to test good people. It's the price of keeping your heart open." Now those words sounded like a warning. Suddenly her phone buzzed. A new message appeared from an unknown number. It read, "He's still helping them, but not everyone wants him to." She froze, staring at the screen. Before she could reply, the number disappeared. Message gone, sender deleted. The next morning, she drove out of the city to clear her head. The air smelled of rain, and the road was quiet. She found herself on a hill overlooking Los Angeles, the skyline stretching endlessly under the gray sky. She thought about the man she once knew, his calm eyes, his quiet strength, his endless kindness, and she wondered how someone like him could be hunted for trying to help. As the wind brushed through her hair, she whispered to herself, "If you're out there, I'll find you before they do." Just then, she noticed a car parked a short distance away. Black tinted windows, engine off. She felt that same chill again. As she turned toward her own car, a faint reflection in her side mirror caught her eye. The same man from the studio parking lot. Black coat, dark glasses, standing motionless. This time he wasn't watching from a distance. He was walking toward her. She stepped back, her heart thundering, but before she could move further, he stopped several feet away and said in a calm, deep voice, "Miss Bullock, you need to stop looking for him. For your sake and his." She stared at him, her fear giving way to anger. "Who are you?" she demanded. He looked down briefly, then met her eyes. "Someone who used to protect him. But things have changed. He's not the man you remember." Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You're lying." The man shook his head slowly. "Then ask yourself why every letter you received came after he disappeared. Do you really know who's been writing to you?" Before she could answer, he turned and walked back to his car. Seconds later, he was gone, leaving behind silence, tire marks, and a question that tore through her chest like a storm. Had the notes truly been from Keanu? Or had someone else been leading her there all along? The truth unravels. The drive home after that confrontation felt endless. Every red light seemed longer. Every car in her mirror looked suspicious. Sandra's thoughts moved faster than the traffic. Each memory, each letter, every word Keanu had written to her now carried doubt. When she reached home, she locked the door and stood by the window staring at her reflection in the glass. She looked calm on the outside, but inside, her heartbeat was loud enough to drown the silence. She kept hearing his voice, the man in black. "Do you really know who's been writing to you?" She opened the wooden box again, the one that held all of Keanu's letters. She spread them across the table. studying the handwriting carefully. Every curve, every line, every pause between words. At first glance, they looked identical to his. But when she looked closer, something felt wrong. The spacing between words was slightly wider. The slant of the letters leaned a little sharper. Subtle differences, but enough to shake her. She pulled out an old birthday card Keanu had sent her years ago, one she had kept in a drawer. When she placed it beside the letters, the truth became clearer. Whoever wrote these new notes had mimicked him, but not perfectly. Her breath grew shallow. Someone had been pretending to be him. Someone wanted her to follow this trail. She sat down slowly, her fingers trembling over the paper. "Why?" she whispered to herself. "Who would do this?" The next morning, she went to visit an old friend, a retired journalist named Tom, who had once helped her with a charity investigation years ago. Tom was sharp, quiet, and trusted no one easily. When she told him everything, he didn't interrupt once. He listened, his brow furrowed, then finally said, "This doesn't sound random. Someone wanted you to move, to search, to find that lake. They wanted to see what you'd do." "But why me?" she asked softly. "Because you're connected to him. You're the only one who would believe every word without proof," he replied. His words hit hard. She felt guilt rise in her chest. She had wanted so badly to believe that Keanu had reached out, that he was safe, that he had thought of her. She hadn't seen the trap hiding inside the kindness. Tom asked to keep one of the letters. He said he had contacts who could trace the ink and paper type. "Give me a few days," he said. "But Sandra, be careful. Whoever's behind this, they're watching you for a reason." That night, she dreamed of Keanu. He was standing by the lake again, the water calm behind him. He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. When she called out to him, his voice echoed like it was miles away. "Don't follow their path, San. It's not mine." She woke up sweating, her pillow damp with tears she didn't remember shedding. The message lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. 2 days later, Tom called. His voice was tense. "I found something. Meet me at the old pier in Malibu. Don't bring anyone." She drove there in silence, the sound of waves crashing growing louder as she neared the shore. Tom stood near the edge, his coat flapping in the wind. He held an envelope. "The ink on these letters," he began, "wasn't made in the U.S. It's custom-made in Europe. The same kind used by a private agency that handled celebrity security and other things." She frowned. "Other things?" He nodded slowly. "Disappearances, damage control, image cleaning. They erase people, not physically but publicly." The words made her knees weak. "You're saying they're hiding him?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe he asked them to. But then there's this." He handed her a photograph. It was blurry, taken from a distance. In it, Keanu stood near a cabin, talking to 2 men in dark suits. One of them was the same man who had warned her at the hill. Sandra's breath hitched. "So he's alive. But why won't he reach out?" Tom looked at her with quiet concern. "Because he doesn't want to be found. Or maybe he can't." They stood in silence for a while, the waves crashing softly beneath them. Finally, Tom added, "There's more. That agency. They went bankrupt years ago, but someone kept funding them quietly. And one of the names on the file matches Keanu's old foundation." She felt dizzy. Everything connected now. The symbol, the letters, the warnings. Someone had twisted his good deeds into something darker. Maybe he had tried to stop them. Maybe that's why he vanished. As she turned to ask more, a sudden sound broke through the wind, a car engine starting nearby. She turned and saw headlights flash once, then disappear into the road. Tom frowned. "We should go," he said. They split up, agreeing to talk again in 2 days. But that night, as Sandra drove home, a strange unease filled her. She checked her rearview mirror several times. A black car followed her for a few miles, then turned away. The next morning, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, a voice said quietly, "Stop digging, Sandra. You're not supposed to know what he gave up." Before she could reply, the line went dead. Hours later, she tried calling Tom. No answer. She texted, emailed, even called his assistant. Nothing. By evening, her fear turned to panic. She drove to his house, but when she arrived, the door was ajar. The lights were off, his phone lay on the table, and the envelope he had shown her was gone. On the floor near the window, she found something small, a torn corner of the photo he had given her, the one of Keanu near the cabin. The rest was missing. She knelt on the floor, her hands shaking, tears blurring her vision. "What are they doing to you?" she whispered. Then she noticed something else. Scratched faintly into the wooden table were 4 words, messy and rushed. "He left something behind." She ran her fingers over the words, her heart pounding. What had he left? And where? As the wind from the open window moved through the quiet house, she realized something chilling. Tom must have written it in his last moments before they took him. And somewhere, hidden between the lies, the notes, and the shadows, Keanu had left her one final clue, something powerful enough that people were willing to risk everything to keep it buried. What he left behind, the night wrapped around Sandra's house like a silent warning. She sat on the edge of her bed, Tom's final message echoing in her mind. He left something behind. Those 4 words refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them carved into the wood, rough and desperate. The wind outside rattled the windows, and she found herself staring at the small box that held Keanu's letters. If Tom was right, then everything she had read, everything she had believed, was only half the truth. And somewhere in those folded papers or hidden memories, he had left something more, something that mattered enough for people to chase and silence anyone who came close. She took out each letter again, spreading them across the floor. She checked the envelopes, the folds, the handwriting, the ink stains, every detail. Then, under one of the notes, the one she had found near the lake, she noticed a tiny crease that hadn't been there before. She lifted the paper gently and saw faint pencil markings along the edge, almost invisible under the light. She fetched a flashlight, tilted the paper, and her breath caught. Faintly written across the bottom was a sequence of numbers, 417K1129. It didn't look like a date, maybe a code, maybe a location. She whispered the numbers aloud, as if hearing them might make them mean something. The next morning, she took the note to an old contact from her early acting days. A production technician named Lucas, who now worked with digital restorations and archives. He owed her a favor. When she handed him the paper, she asked, "Can you check if this code means anything? Coordinates, file names, anything?" Lucas scanned it under ultraviolet light, frowning. "It's definitely written with something meant to fade," he said. "The numbers look like a catalog reference, maybe for film reels, old records, or archives. But see this?" He pointed at a small, faint mark near the corner. The symbol of 2 circles, one dark, one light. Sandra exhaled slowly. "That's the same symbol from his foundation?" Lucas nodded. "Then whatever this is, it's connected to them." Later that night, Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her again. Every car outside seemed familiar, every reflection in the window too still. She closed her blinds and sat with her back to the wall. The world felt smaller now, like every shadow hid a secret. She pulled out her laptop and searched through old news about Keanu's foundation. Articles praised its work, but buried deep in archives were stories of financial irregularities, missing donations, and unnamed beneficiaries. One report mentioned a private storage facility registered under a code, 4117K1129. Her heart raced. It was a warehouse outside Los Angeles. The next morning, before the sun rose, she drove there alone. The building stood at the edge of an industrial area, gray, forgotten, half hidden by weeds. Her footsteps echoed as she approached the gate. A faded sign read, "Real Haven Storage." Inside, the air smelled of dust and metal. Rows of shelves stretched endlessly, stacked with old film canisters, boxes, and records. She searched for the code, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Then, near the back, she found it. A small locker marked K1129. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, there was no money, no documents, no obvious secret, only a small black case. She unlatched it carefully and froze. Inside were 2 old videotapes labeled in Keanu's handwriting, Truth Project, Part 1 and Part 2. She whispered his name under her breath. "What did you do, Keanu?" She carried the tapes home, locking the doors behind her. She didn't have a player, so she called Lucas again. When he arrived, his eyes widened. "These are from the early 2000s, he said. "We'll need special equipment to play them. But if this is really his work, then this could explain everything." They connected the player, and the screen flickered to life. The video was grainy but clear enough to show Keanu sitting in a simple room. No makeup, no spotlight, no stage. Just him, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, his tone calm but heavy, "then it means I couldn't stay silent anymore." Sandra felt her throat tighten. He continued, "Years ago, I helped start a foundation to give back to people who had nothing. But somewhere along the way, people I trusted turned it into something else. They used the donations for control, not compassion. They built networks, hired private agents, silenced voices. I found out too late. They wanted me to keep quiet, to be the face of their goodness while they buried the truth." He paused, his eyes filled with quiet pain. "I couldn't let that happen. I left, but before I disappeared, I copied everything, the files, the names, the transfers. I hid them in a safe place. And if this reaches Sandra, you'll know what to do with it." The tape ended abruptly. Lucas turned to her, stunned. He exposed them, his own people. This is why they erased him. Sandra sat still, tears filling her eyes. "He didn't run away," she whispered. "He was protecting everyone, even me." They played the second tape. This time, the footage showed a list of documents and names, blurred but real. Powerful figures, companies, hidden charities, the kind of truth that could ruin reputations overnight. Keanu's voice returned, softer now. "If I disappear, it's by choice. I won't let them use me again. But someone has to make this right. San, you always believed in kindness. Now you have to protect it." The screen went black. Sandra buried her face in her hands. She finally understood. All the notes, the messages, the warnings, they weren't random. They were steps leading her to this truth. Keanu had trusted her with the final piece of his fight. Lucas broke the silence. "You can't keep this, Sandra. They'll come for it. You need to get this to someone safe." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I know exactly where it should go." But before they could leave, headlights flashed outside her window. A car had pulled up silently. Another followed. The shadows moved fast. Too fast. Lucas stood up. "They found us." She grabbed the tapes, hiding them under her coat. Footsteps approached the door. A loud knock shook the walls. A voice outside said firmly, "Miss Bullock, please open up. We need to talk about those tapes." Sandra whispered to Lucas, "We can't let them have this." The knocking grew louder. She looked toward the back door, the only exit left. She grabbed her keys, whispered a quiet thank you to Keanu's courage, and ran into the night. As the rain began to fall, she didn't look back. She knew this was only the beginning, and that somewhere, out there in the silence, Keanu was watching, waiting to see if she'd finish what he started. The final truth. The rain poured harder, as Sandra ran down the narrow alley behind her house, clutching the tapes close to her chest. Every sound echoed. Footsteps, tires sliding, distant sirens. She didn't know if they were chasing her, but she didn't wait to find out. She reached her car, jumped in, and drove into the storm. The streets blurred in front of her, but her mind stayed sharp. She had one destination. A journalist she trusted. Someone fearless enough to handle what Keanu had left behind. Her name was Claire Nolan, an investigative reporter who had once exposed corruption inside major charities. If anyone could bring the truth to light safely, it was her. After 2 hours of driving through relentless rain, Sandra reached a quiet motel near the edge of the city. Claire was waiting there, her coat soaked, her eyes tired but determined. "You brought them?" Claire asked. Sandra nodded and handed over the tapes. "He wanted this to reach someone honest," she said softly. They watched the videos together again. Keanu's confession, his warning, his courage. Claire took notes quietly, her expression growing more serious with each word. When it ended, she looked at Sandra and whispered, "He knew what he was doing. He exposed a network that's bigger than either of us imagined. This will change everything." Sandra's voice cracked slightly. "It already has. People have died trying to hide it." Claire promised to act carefully. "We'll encrypt it, duplicate it, and send it to trusted outlets. They can't stop all of them." But before they could move, the motel lights flickered. Sandra froze. A car door slammed outside. Claire looked through the curtain. 2 men in dark coats stood near the entrance, scanning the parking lot. "They found us," Claire whispered. They grabbed the tapes and slipped out the back door. The rain had turned the ground to mud, their shoes sinking with every step. They reached the edge of the lot and saw another vehicle, a black SUV, headlights dimmed. A door opened. A man stepped out. For a moment, Sandra's breath stopped. She recognized him. It was the same man in black who had warned her before. He raised his hands calmly. "Don't run. I'm not here to hurt you." Claire held the tapes tightly, her eyes narrowing. "Then why follow us?" The man's voice was steady. "Because you're walking straight into something you don't understand." "He didn't want this exposed yet." Sandra shook her head. "You're lying. I saw his words. He wanted the truth out." The man looked at her with quiet sadness. "He wanted the truth protected, not weaponized. If this goes public now, people will twist it. They'll destroy his name to protect theirs." Sandra's voice trembled. "So what do we do? Hide forever?" He stepped closer, rain dripping down his face. "No, you finish what he started, the right way. He left something else, something you haven't found." "What?" she asked. The man reached into his pocket and handed her a small metal key. "He told me to give you this if the tapes ever resurfaced. It opens a box at St. Helens Chapel, the one by the coast. Inside is what he called his final message." Sandra hesitated, but something in his eyes felt genuine. She took the key. By dawn, she and Claire reached the chapel, an old stone building overlooking the gray sea. It was silent except for the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Inside, the air smelled of salt and candle wax. They searched near the altar until Sandra found a small locked compartment carved into the wall. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a wooden box, weathered but strong. She opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten pages, dozens of them, and a small voice recorder. Claire pressed play. Keanu's voice filled the chapel, quiet but steady. "If you've come this far, then you already know too much," he said. "I didn't run away. I walked out of a system that forgot what humanity means. I didn't want fame or pity or exposure. I wanted to remind people that kindness can't survive inside corruption. So I left, not to disappear, but to start again quietly where goodness can still breathe." His tone softened. "Sandra, if you're listening, you were always the one who saw through the noise. Don't fight them with hate. Fight them with truth. Not everything needs to burn to be seen. His words ended with a faint click. Sandra sat down slowly, tears streaming down her face. The wind howled through the cracks in the chapel walls, and for a moment she felt as if he were there beside her. Claire put a gentle hand on her shoulder. He didn't want a war. He wanted a reminder. Sandra nodded through her tears. Then that's what we'll give him. They left the tapes and the recordings with a private network of journalists who agreed to release them carefully. Not for spectacle, but for truth. The world would see what he exposed, but his name would remain untouched, his legacy preserved in silence. Months passed. The Foundation's corruption came to light quietly through documents and anonymous leaks. People were held accountable, lives were changed. The headlines never mentioned Keanu Reeves, but his message lived in every article about integrity and compassion that followed. Sandra often visited the chapel by the sea. She would sit near the wooden box, watching the horizon as the sun rose. Sometimes she imagined she could hear his voice carried by the wind, gentle, steady, unbroken. One morning, as she sat there, she noticed a small letter tucked into the cracks of the old stone wall. Her heart skipped as she unfolded it. It was written in familiar handwriting. "You did it right, San. Thank you for not turning kindness into noise. I'm okay. Keep living in light. Always." She smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. She folded the letter and held it to her heart. Somewhere out there, beyond the cameras, beyond the noise, Keanu Reeves was still walking quietly among people who didn't know his name, still giving, still kind, still free. And though the world would never know the full story of what they shared, Sandra carried it with her always, not as a secret, but as a promise. Because some bonds aren't built on fame or memory. They're built on truth, humility, and love that doesn't need to be seen to last forever. And theirs was unbreakable.